Previously on Inside Criminal Minds. When we last left our intrepid hero, he was staring down the barrel of a shotgun. Stay tuned to have these questions answered. Will he survive the footpath killer? Why did the footpath killer stutter? And why did, in the last episode, I accidentally called the footpath killer the Green River Killer? Okay, I messed up in the last video. Sorry. If you didn't catch last week's episode, the link is in the description down below. Now, this episode starts with Gideon being scared to death by the footpath killer, and a dope song that I will link in the description. He tells the killer that he knows why he stutters. Then all tension is gone because we realize that he is telling this story to other agents, which is an inherent problem with the series as a whole. Later on, when the team gets into perilous journeys, we know that they won't kill off a main character due to the fact that they just won't. It kind of cuts the tension in a way where you don't really care too much about the perilous journey. Anyway, when we find out that he's talking to different agents about the footpath killer, Elle asks him, why did he stutter? Which is a good question to ask if you're trying to learn about behavioral analysis. However, Gideon wants her to figure it out, which is very good for Elle's character to kind of bring her into the fold as a behavioral analysis unit team member. That's when the team finds out about a video of a serial arsonist at a college. So they have to figure out why he's setting fires and how to stop him. We also meet a new character, and I will do both of these characters at the same time. One is JJ. She's the liaison of the behavioral analysis unit, and she gets a lot more screen time in later episodes, but she's a big part of the team, and especially when cases that people don't want the behavioral analysis unit on due to the nature of the actual case itself. And that, again, comes into play a lot later. And also, I wanted to talk about Penelope Garcia. She was shown in the first episode, but she doesn't really get that much screen time, both in the last episode and in this episode. But I feel like it's a better time to talk about her now. She has kind of a working relationship with Derek Morgan, and their back and forth is really adorable if you ever watch it. Also, Penelope Garcia is basically the tech guru of the team. She's big brother that learns all of the different things in the background, does different things, and again, it'll get more complicated later on in the series. Back to the story proper, Reid is playing chess. And Gideon says, I can checkmate you in 3. And Morgan goes, well, you'll start beating him if you start learning. And Reid's like, what do you mean learning? He goes, learning to think outside the box. Which is, again, another theme that goes through this episode of him trying to think outside the box. And it's a really good learning experience for him, and ultimately helps in capturing the unsub. Anyway, so they get onto the plane, and they're talking about statistics on serial arsonists, and mostly this is where Reid comes in and becomes their human Google box. Anytime that they need a fact or a figure, they just ask Reid, because he can read 10,000 words a minute and he has an eidetic memory, which they take full advantage of every time that they can, just so that he can show off the different statistics, and also so they don't have to use Google all the time. Anyway, Gideon starts talking about how we should not worry about the statistics because we shouldn't rely on precedents of what a serial arsonist should be. What if this arsonist isn't the same as the rest of them? But then he goes back into talking about how the unsub is a he, and so it just kind of sends a little bit of a mixed signal. Anyway, when they get down onto the actual campus, Gideon goes, well, stop looking like FBI agents, which is a little bit weird because in every other episode of the series, they don't really wear suits other than, of course, Agent Hotchner. Everybody else starts wearing t-shirts. They do dress nicely, but for the most part, they don't dress in suits all the time, and this is like the only episode they actually do. Plus, it also showcases the fact that because Gideon is Agent Reid's mentor, Reid really does emulate a lot of the fashion styles of Gideon. Fast forward a little bit, after they start investigating the original 3 fires that were in the video, they also start to look at Gideon goes into one of the buildings and somebody who's trying to get some water out of the water fountain and it's not working, which triggers him to think, because in the previous fires the water had been turned off, that this was the next target. So he runs, grabs the fire alarm, pulls it, tries to get as many people out as possible. He gets up to one of the teachers' offices, which is where the fire started, and here's my little bit of, I don't understand this. The teacher in question was a chemistry teacher, which means that he knows a little bit about safety, and there is no way that if accelerant was on the floor he would actually turn on a light, because you don't know if that's what's going to trigger the explosion or if that's what's going to turn on. You honestly only need a little bit of wire space for it to arc and set something on fire. Also, it's the same reason why you don't turn on or off lights when you smell gas, is you don't want that spark of turning on or off the light. So it doesn't make any sense, but it does play to Gideon's humanity as an agent to think of, hey, I want to make sure that this guy is okay. He can't ultimately, and that's when Morgan pulls him away from the building and says, we have to leave because the building's on fire. There's no way you're going to be able to save him. Next, we're going to talk about the red herring of this episode. It's the security guard that Gideon talks to about his necklace and how the necklace is new and that somebody, his girlfriend, gave it to him, profiling him in a way that reminds me a lot of a future episode, Tabula Rosa, where they do a lot better of a job of profiling the civilian. Then we get a good scene from Reid talking to the science kids. And he's talking to them in a way where he uses a lot of facts and figures, and eventually Hotchner steps in and goes, hey, we just need help figuring out how he did it. That's when the students tell him about putting gasoline in a light bulb, and that's what created the explosion. Also, we get a girl that describes how to create a self-igniting Molotov cocktail using certain household objects like sugar. And later on in the episode, they say something that they don't really show, they just say it, and I'll explain that again a little bit later. That's when they get a tip on the line with Penelope Garcia and JJ, who are back at Quantico. I do this for Karen, and that's when both Morgan and Elle decide to interview every Karen that's on campus. That's when the red herring comes back of the security guard, and he talks to Gideon about the 3-body problem, and that's when he turns out that he is actually a homosexual, and that he was going to incur the wrath of God from his ex-girlfriend. That's when it hits Agent Gideon that it's not Karen, it's Charon, a Hebrew god, a Hebrew deity, and that's why they have to be bathed in fire. And this is when a big chaotic scene happens. Hotchner's talking about this, Reid's talking about that, Elle's talking about this, and Gideon, as the leader, really brings everybody back to center and is like, look, religion could be a part of it, but it's not completely the compulsion, which triggers Reid to think of a compulsive behavior like obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, here's something that I don't really enjoy about this episode, is the fact that in the episode, they do the quote-unquote zoom in enhance cliche, where Reid is watching the video and they zoom in and enhance, and now he can see the doorknob shaking 3 times. I hate that because there is no way to basically zoom in and enhance. Oh well, that's when he tells the group about all of the different 3s that he found. 3rd floor, 3rd day, 3rd teacher, all of these different things that deal with 3s, which leads them to the chemistry students again, and going back to the scene where Reid is talking to the science kids, the unsub is supposedly turning her ring 3 times, and they don't really show that. I wish they did, because also in a future episode, Lo-Fi, where they, again, profile he wasn't really a civilian, but he was a cop. A different agent is telling the cop, you covered your shield when somebody was disrespecting the chain of command. But they don't show that scene, so there's no payoff to that. I wish that they would show that so that when you watch it over again, you go, oh, you can start to kind of get into the know. Now it's a race against time to try to find this girl and also save whoever she's potentially trying to kill. Eventually, they go back to the science building, which I don't understand why they didn't think the science building 3rd floor to begin with, just because of her obsessive compulsive disorder. That's when Hotchner and Gideon start talking about how they should not try to talk her down. They should just basically shoot first and ask questions later, because she's not in the right mind to actually stop what she's doing. However, Hotchner goes against that and basically tells Gideon that he was buying time, which revolves back into the Elle problem, which is the entire episode she's been asking people, why did he stutter? How do we know what stuttering does? She even, when she's talking to Morgan, she talks about how different things exacerbate the stutter, but not many people know exactly why they stutter. Going back into the end of the episode, that's when we see the plane, and Elle tells Gideon, hey, I figured it out. You were using the stutter to buy time so that you could turn the tables on him. And that's when Gideon turns and says, I don't know why somebody stutters, but I do know how to provoke a stutter to gain the upper hand. And that's when they do a really good green screen flip from the plane into the convenience store. And he starts challenging the footpath killer's psyche by basically telling him that he's stupid and, hey, just spit out what you want to say, and that kind of thing. Eventually, he gets the shotgun away from the unsub, and this story also in a future episode has a little bit of merit, and I'll get back into it later on, but that's where the episode ends, is him defeating the footpath killer. So this episode really did a lot for both Reid and Elle, and also Gideon. Gideon as a teacher, you see him basically letting his students figure it out instead of handing it to them, and that really speaks volumes for him as a teacher. Reid learned to think outside the box, and he starts to get better at chess. However, you can't beat the master of Gideon, so he still loses. And again, Elle gets a really good episode in learning how to become part of the behavioral analysis unit. In summary, it was a good sister episode to the previous episode with the footpath killer, and in the next episode we're going to put the nail in the coffin of Adrian Bale, the ghost that's kind of been haunting Gideon since he's came back. Even Morgan has been worried about Gideon and Adrian Bale's contribution to his psyche. Anyway, that's all I got for today. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.